tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hi there. Welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, David McKnight, best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and Tax-Free Income for Life, all of which can be purchased in single copies at Amazon or wherever you buy fine books. You can buy them in bulk, mixing and matching purchases of different books to achieve bulk discounts at davidmcknightbooks.com. If you are looking for someone to help you navigate all of the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, why not head over to davidmcknight.com? We'll connect you with a member of our elite POZ advisor group, among the most qualified in the nation at tax-free retirement planning. And if you're an advisor who wants to become part of this elite group, head on over to powerofzero.com and opt into my free video series. Okay, today I'm going to be rebroadcasting to you my interview with David Hayes, who has a radio show in Bloomington, Indiana. We touched upon a lot of different subjects, the most important of which I think are the three possible scenarios for how tax rates could go up over the course of the next 10 years. So sit back and enjoy my wide-ranging discussion with David Hayes.
It's time to get back on the road, Dave. I'm assuming your schedule, your calendar is starting to fill up for the fall. Will we get to see you out on stage again soon?
Starting to fill up a little bit. Things are starting to loosen up, and calendar's starting to fill up. It was unusual going from 90 speaking engagements a year to just a couple in the last 12 months. So I'm anxious to get back out on the road.
Well, we said this before we came on the air. That gave me a good reason to have you on my program now, a record 3 times in 2021, which is unbelievable because we've had you on at least once a year for several years, especially when the debut of The Power of Zero came out, and then you had the updated version, of course, the documentary that came out. And Dave, I look back on those, and I watched it again last night knowing that you were going to be on today. And this was pre-pandemic, an additional $4.8 trillion of borrowed money. And man, if you weren't a prophet then, you're certainly a prophet now or a realist now. Here we sit, right? Looking at the cusp of $30 trillion in debt. We have over $30 trillion sitting in 401ks and IRAs. Is that coincidental? Maybe, but it's not something that should not be noteworthy. So people are sitting here, Dave, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, they understand math. Watching that last night just made me think, oh my gosh, here it is now right in front of us. So what are you telling people now? I know I'm going to go through some of your podcasts I've listened to recently as well, but where's your mindset right now as you look at the fiscal health of the United States, you look at the world, you look at the debt, you look at all these different things. What's your mindset right now, and what are you telling
them? I'm really struck by an interview I had recently with Maya MacGuineas on my podcast. Mm-hmm. She's the president of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. She appeared in our movie, as you recall. I'm not an economist, but I certainly study a lot of economists and people like Maya MacGuineas. And so I asked her what she thought about the fiscal condition of our country now in the immediate wake of COVID-19 and what's going to happen over the next 10 years. And she really didn't pull any punches. She says, David, it absolutely terrifies me. That's a word. You can go look it up on my podcast. She says that's a word. It terrifies her to think of what's going to happen in our country over the next 10 years, given the extent to which COVID exacerbated our already unsubstantial trajectory. So I think the next 10 years is going to be an interesting trip. I'm hoping that tax rates can stay low, but I think that we can talk about this certainly, but I think the Biden administration is going to attempt to kick this can down the road. We'll see. But at the end of all of this, the fix is going to be even more extreme, even more draconian, and we risk seeing tax rates rise even more precipitously than we did back in 2018 when we first made that movie.
When you think about tax rates going up, of course, everyone is laser focused on that top 0.5%. And you hear the billionaires now coming out saying, oh, we'd love to pay more tax, from Warren Buffett to Jeff Bezos to Mark Cuban. And the fact is that obviously they have not been paying a lot of income taxes. So that's fine. But when you talk to Maya, we looked at taxes on the middle class. And I think everyone needs to understand that when tax rates go up, they go up. It's not just laser focused on this group or that group. They're going to go up. And I thought that was an interesting part of your conversation with her as well.
Yeah, so if you go all the way back in time, back to, say, 1960, the highest marginal tax bracket was 89, but the lowest marginal tax bracket was 22. And so what you find is that highest marginal tax bracket tends to be a harbinger or bellwether, if you will, for what all of the other tax rates are doing. And what Maya MacGuineas has said repeatedly, and she's got a great article on her website, the Committee for Responsible Federal Government. She actually did a study where she said, okay, how high would we have to raise taxes on those making more than $450,000 just to prevent the debt from growing at more than $1 trillion per year? And the number was 103%. You'd have to tax them on 103% of any dollar they made above and beyond $450,000.
Is that possible?
It's not possible. It's obviously not possible. So she said, people won't work if they have no incentive for working. So she lowered it down to 80. She lowered it down to 250,000. Basically, figured out that 80% of those dollars would have to be taxed. And so she kept lowering the threshold, and she finally got to the point where she said anybody making money above and beyond $50,000 would have to give up 40% of their taxes, or 40% in taxes. So the long and the short of it really is that it's just not enough to tax the rich. Just taxing the rich doesn't even begin to touch the problem. You have to broaden the tax base, and there will soon come a time when everybody is going to fall under the scope of the IRS. It's not just going to be the rich. There's not enough money. The rich don't have enough money to be able to pay for all of the things that we want to pay for and keep the debt at a sustainable level. So there will come a time when everybody's going to have to pony up.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about America's true national debt, because not just the debt we have on the books, but when you look at unfunded liabilities going forward, now that's granted. It's no different than if you have a mortgage on your house, right? You have $500,000 of debt, and then you have payments you have to make going forward. But what if that debt, instead of decreasing, continue to increase? What is that unfunded payment in the future going to be? You did a podcast, Dave, I believe back on June 9th. You actually broke it up into two segments on what America's true national debt is. And again, folks, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just trying to inform you and then to inspire you to do what you can control in your life, which is to take the taxable money that you have sitting in your 401ks, your IRAs, and logically move the correct amount from taxable later to tax-free forever. So we're going to take a quick break, continue our conversation with best-selling author David McKnight of The Power of Zero. This is Your Money with David Hayes. I know we have a lot of our listeners, Dave, that follow you in the podcast, and they'll tell me they listen to my show, they listen to your show, and I have them turned on to a few others as well. So we're grateful for that. And if we had a lot of time to put out a lot of content in 2020 and now in the early 2021, but man, did I really enjoy a regurgitation of a topic that you had, I believe, in the Power of Zero book, maybe it was the update, on America's true national debt. Because we're not just looking at $28 trillion and running trillion-dollar deficits each year for the next foreseeable future, but we have what's called unfunded liabilities, as David Walker put it. But can you talk a little bit about that podcast you had, episode number 136 on America's true national debt? Broke up into two segments, by the way, June 2nd and June 9th. There was so much to listen to. I loved it. Dave, explain to people that.
Yeah, so the guest on that podcast was a guy named Dr. Larry Kotlikoff. He's a professor out of Boston University. He's actually one of the foremost experts in the world on what we call fiscal gap accounting or generational accounting. And basically what he does, he says, look, what the government is telling you is the true national debt is not really the national debt. He says if we ran our books like every other country in the world, in the developed world, we would have a lot more debt. And basically what he does is he predicts over the next 75 years, everything that we promised to pay for, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, and he projects out over that same time period what we actually are going to draw into the Treasury, what we can actually afford to pay under today's tax rates. He says, hey, look, if there's a difference between those two numbers, then your country has a fiscal gap, and that's your true national debt. He says the true national debt is not $28 trillion. It's not even $120 trillion, some people say. At one point, he said it was about $239 trillion, but then he adjusted his number in the present value calculation. He says the real national debt's about $180 trillion, which basically means, for the layman here, that we would have to have $180 trillion sitting in our bank account today, earning Treasury rates, to be able to deliver on everything that we've promised that we can't afford to pay. So the true national debt is something on the order of 8 or 9 times our gross domestic product, which is just massive. It's just you can't even fathom how much we're really going to be on the hook for that we just don't have the money to pay for.
I wrote my new book, Dave. I'm going to send you a copy, 2025, The Final Drive, which is obviously a metaphor on the tax code expiring at the end of 2025 and at least going back to where it was before, if not sooner. And I borrowed some ideas of yours. I borrowed some ideas from Tom Hegna. I borrowed some ideas from Ed. Ed wrote a foreword for my book. Did you know that? Just like he did your book. And I think Ed's only written two.
I think so.
Did you know that, Dave?
And he writes an excellent foreword, so I can't wait to read it.
He killed it. And I only know Ed to have written 2 forewords, one for your book and now one for mine. I don't know that he's written a foreword for anyone else. So I felt like I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was dancing around, happy, smiling. It was fantastic. Ed obviously has been on the same mission that you have, and I have been for well over a decade. And for people to understand this topic, what we're talking about, that hey, taxes have to go up. And we're already paying a lot in tax. When you take in Medicare and Social Security tax, your state tax, your sales tax, your income tax, we're already paying a bunch of tax. But for people to understand, I can't control sales tax. I can't control your payroll taxes. But the only thing we can control is the money that we have in tax-deferred accounts. And Ed has all kinds of good analogies like you do, Dave. Why would you make a deal like that to say, okay, I'm going to put my money away today at a tax deduction at 12%, 22, 24, you name it. I don't care what it is. And I'm going to wait, let it grow tax-deferred, and then pay the tax down the road at a completely unknown rate. And Dave's done a great job of explaining exactly the math behind the reality of higher taxes down the road. So shifting money from taxable later to tax-free forever, and there's only a few vehicles that even still allow that to happen. Dave, I don't know how else to put it to people, but they need to act now. And that's where the sense of urgency with the title 2025, The Final Drive, is, hey, time is ticking. Time is not on your side. We have a limited amount of time, and I hope we still have to 2025. Maybe in some cases, I know you did a piece not long ago about Biden maybe potentially extending the tax cuts a little bit longer. Who knows? But I don't know. That's the thing. We just don't know.
Yeah. So I think the thing that people have to remember is what's the true purpose of a retirement savings account? Is the true purpose to give you a deduction? Or is the true purpose to maximize your cash flow at a period in time when you can least afford to pay the taxes? So let's think about what people are doing when they contribute to a 401k or an IRA, or they fail to undertake a Roth conversion. They're basically saying, look, I'm happy deducting dollars at today's tax rates, even though they're historically low, so that I can postpone the payment of those taxes till some point much further down the road when experts have warned. And it's not just me, it's people that understand this stuff better than anyone else in America have warned that tax rates have to rise dramatically just to keep our country solvent. And we're really entering into that business partnership with the IRS. And we're saying, hey, look, how much money am I going to have when I retire? I have $1 million, but unless I can accurately predict what tax rates are going to be in the year I take that money out, I don't really know how much money I have, and it's hard to plan for retirement if I don't know how much money I have.
I'd rather have a bird in the hand is rather better than 2 in the bush. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, you mentioned how tax rates mathematically would have to be over 100% for us simply to pay for what we've already done and what we've promised. But you did an episode back in May on the United States demographic time bomb. This has been, heck, I've been talking about this since I went to demographic school back 25 years ago with Harry and learning about demographics, predictable spending power, birth rates, and things like that. It certainly would help. We had a lot more people paying into the system, but we do have a demographic time bomb, and it's for real. So we're going to talk to Dave about that when we come back. This is Your Money with David Hayes. Welcome back, everyone. It's Your Money with David Hayes, best-selling author David McKnight, third time on the show in 2021, an all-time world record. We appreciate that very much. Dave, I'm assuming you're still hunkered down over in Puerto Rico, but you mentioned earlier you're going to get back out on the road here pretty soon, going from 90 different speaking engagements to nearly 0. Puerto Rico in pretty good shape, ready for visitors?
Yeah, they're ready for visitors. You just have to be ready for still pretty locked down, pretty much masks wherever you go. And COVID tests coming and going. It's among the most locked down in the nation still. But we welcome any visitors, of course.
Talking about people and people working, I did it in News of the Week that we have over number of job openings in the U.S. climbed to 9.3 million at the end of April. Highest number ever recorded, up 1 million in just the last month. Help wanted signs everywhere. I'm not sure what the issue is, but it seems like we just need more people. We need more people willing to take the jobs. I was talking to a young man. I'm like, hey, dude, you can make $15 an hour at McDonald's. He goes, I'm not working at McDonald's. I go, why not? He goes, it's McDonald's. I'm like, what's $15 an hour? I'm like, people, I don't understand it. The point of it is that we have had fewer and fewer births in the United States. We've had immigration that's been all over the place, which, by the way, our doors technically still swing in here. We're not shut down. People aren't begging to get into Japan, as an example, but they still want to come to the U.S. But you did an episode back in May, and you talked about, with a guest, I believe, discuss the United States and the demographics and the time bomb. Why is it so important that we have people, especially young people? Because right now we certainly have an older and aging population. And by the way, Dave, thank you very much for your personal demographic time bomb. You have a ton of kids, as I typically mention, and I only have one. So you did a good job. So to talk about that episode, because I thought that was really good.
Yeah, so the way a country should be growing demographically, if they want to keep their entitlement programs, their social security safety nets, if they want to keep all those intact and thriving, in theory, you need to have each subsequent generation needs to be a little bit larger than the last. Okay, so it should proceed in an inverted pyramid sort of a fashion. But that's not at all what we're finding. And I explain this in a lot of my presentations. You had the baby boom that started in 1946 and went all the way to 1964. We currently have 78 million baby boomers, single largest voting bloc in the nation. There's a reason that's an important fact. But baby boomers didn't have nearly as many children as their parents did. They had roughly 30 million fewer children. And so now all of a sudden you have Generation Xers like you and me who have to shoulder the brunt of all of their Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid benefits, okay? And so the problem is you have 30 million fewer people when the program's actually designed to be supported by, like I said, a subsequent generation that's just a little bit bigger than the previous one. So what happens is you have, I don't want to use the word Ponzi scheme because that's got a really negative connotation, but basically these things only survive based on new contributions to the plan. And if those new contributions of the subsequent generation are smaller than those of the previous generation, then that Social Security fund and the money that's earmarked to pay for Medicare and Medicaid, all of a sudden that starts to shrink and go down. And you just get to the point where there's just not enough money in the coffers to be able to pay for all of these programs. If we didn't have all of these safety nets, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But the point is, all of this is what we call non-discretionary spending, which means the government's required to pay for it by law. It would take an act of Congress to get them out of coming up with the money to pay for all of these things. And we're just getting to the point because of demographics, we're just not having as many children as we have in the past. We're getting to the point where these programs are becoming more and more unsustainable. And when we look out and we project at all of the revenue that's going to be coming in from future generations, there's just not enough people generating enough money, bringing in enough taxes into the coffers to be able to pay for everything that we promise. And that sets up a huge sort of financial catastrophe down the road if we don't address it starting 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, in your book, The Power of Zero, you lay out that mathematical reality very well. You talk about the baby boomers and how mathematically the system was going to work based on current birth rates and people paying in the system and life expectancies. But you had all kinds of things working against you. Number one, when Social Security was first introduced, no one lived past 65. Heck, if they did, that was bonus time. And everyone lived longer, and then you have fewer people paying into the system. And like you said, the people that went off to war, when they came back, those are the people that had fewer children. but then even their children had fewer children. So I think of my father-in-law, who was 86 when he passed away a couple of years ago. He was the oldest of 10. He had 3. I have 1. That's most families. That's the way it is. Yeah, and that's where the mathematical realities start to catch up. David McKnight, of course, is my guest, the author of Power of Zero. I'm not going to take you back to these episodes, but I love Ed. Ed and I have been friends forever. Ed Slott, of course. He got his book repurposed again, of course, the Tax Time Bomb, and it's great. But back in March, you had Ed on part 1 and part 2. I did go back and listen to that. I had listened to it one other time. And Ed was no different on your podcast than he is on my radio show. I just say, hello, Ed, and I shut up. And I sit there for 20 minutes, and he talks for 20 minutes. And I say, okay, let's take a break, Ed. We'll be right back. But, man, he laid it out from forever tax to never tax, which is basically his theme for the public television special as well. I don't know. You can't have Ed on enough, but you've had also a really long and good relationship with Ed, I know, over the years. But that episode back in March and late February was really fantastic. It was perfectly timed at just the right message time, everything. It was great.
Yeah, so there's an interesting thing about Ed, and we agree on just about everything. But it's interesting. You have 3 possibilities here for when tax rates are going to go up. And one of the possibilities is, like you've highlighted in your book, you simply revert back to what tax rates were in 2017 starting January 1st, 2026, right?
Right.
First possibility. There's 2 other possibilities, frankly, and the second one we'll talk about is that Joe Biden could say, look, I campaigned on this idea that I'm not going to raise the taxes on married couples making less than $400,000. And so that he would, in his tax reform bill, he would extend those tax cuts that happened originally in 2018, start them in 2, and then extend them for another 8 years, which is what he's allowed to do under budget reconciliation, which means that they would start in 2022 and in 2029, and then expire, go back to what they were in 2017, starting in 2030. So that would give people, if you include this year, essentially 9 years to take advantage of historically low tax rates. So you can get those highly taxable, tax-deferred retirement assets tax-free, stretching that tax obligation out along the way. And then there's Ed Slott. Ed Slott says that he thinks there's a distinct possibility that our situation is so bad that the federal government will come to its senses, and starting even next year that tax rates could go up on everyone. He's got a real sense of urgency there. So there's 3 theses or hypotheses about what could potentially go down over the course of the next 10 years. You got the Ed Slott, who tends to run around with his hair on fire. You've got hey, they'll just let it expire in 2026, or there's my idea that they may extend it starting in 2022 for another 8 years. What's going to happen? You really have to have a crystal ball.
Yeah, and all of our crystal balls are a little bit foggy and cracked most of the time. Dave McKnight is my guest. Grateful as heck having you on, Dave, 3 times in 2021. I promise not to wear you out in 2022 as you're going to be on the road, hopefully, and run into you at a conference somewhere, just like the good old days. But either your family was super excited to have you around or really anxious to get you out of the house. One of the two, and maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think they were pretty happy about it, and we'll see how anxious they are to get me back out on the road here.
Well, I finished my book up last October, November, and as you well know, it takes publishers and compliance and authorizations about 4 or 5 months before it finally came out. And I wrote about the possible elimination of stepped-up cost bases, which is being talked about. I've talked about the federal estate tax, which has been nothing short of a roller coaster since I started in 1994, which used to be like $600,000, believe it or not. It went to 1, went to 2, went to 5, went to 10, went away. We always joke that in 2010, when there was no federal estate tax, our good friend George Steinbrenner passed away that year, folks. A billionaire, died with no federal estate tax. There's always a funny narrative behind all the stories. But, Dave, we appreciate your time. I know it's very valuable, and super excited about getting you back on the road and spreading the word on, hey, get out of the crosshairs, as you put it in your first book, of higher taxes coming, because they're coming. In one form or another, they're coming. So, Dave, thank you so much, and I'll send you a copy of the show. Do you have a copy of my book? If not, I'll stick it in the mail to you and send it to you.
No, I don't have one yet. Would love to have one.
I will get with Kelsey, get your address. I'll have that in the mail to you today, and it's a short read. If you thought your Look Before You Lerp book was embarrassingly short, this one's even worse.
All right.
All right, Dave.
I'm
Thanks
looking
so
forward to
much.
it.
All right, dude. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Okay, folks, that is a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Power of Zero show. Once again, if you need help navigating all of these different pitfalls, head over to davidmcknight.com. We'll hook you up with an elite POZ advisor, among the top advisors in the nation at helping to get you to the 0% tax bracket. If you're an advisor and would like to up your game and get your practice to a Power of Zero style practice, head on over to powerofzero.com. Would love a follow on Twitter at McKnight & Co, at McKnight & Co, and also would love for you to review any of my books on Amazon. That would really make my day. All right, folks, that's it. We will look forward to chatting with you same time next week.